Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Nosferatu The Vampyre, starring Klaus Kinski, Isabelle Adjani, Bruno Ganz, Roland Topper, and Walter Landegast, and directed by Werner Herzog. Now, before I get into this, and I spelled vampire with a Y because that's what the title of the movie is. In case if anybody was wondering why on the link I wrote I spelled vampire with the Y, that's part of the title. I'm not making this up. So, further ado, let's get into the movie. We open the movie in the year 1890 with bones that look like babies, I think they're mummies, as they're dead bodies, as it felt like a strange way to open a movie. Despite showing dead bodies, but it works for a vampire movie, and Lucy Harker, played by Isabelle Adjani, wakes up with a nightmare while her husband Jonathan, played by Bruno Ganz, comforts her as we see the location of two cute little kittens messing around in a cupboard. And we look around, I believe the Netherlands, as Jonathan comes to a store and spots Renfield, played by Roland Topper, giving a task to Jonathan to go to Transylvania today to bring his master Count Dracula, played by Klaus Kinski, while Lucy says not to go there. And the movie is well shot and well made, and I do like the characters, and the acting is well done. Jonathan and Lucy go on a walk on the beach. Jonathan goes on his way to Transylvania, as it's a long ride, like 4 days at least, on a horse until they get to a town, and goes in a place and eats and tells everyone he's going to Transylvania and to see Count Dracula. And the owner says to not go to Transylvania, but he goes anyways, as he's brave as a character he is, and reads the book about vampires. And this is so far better than the original movie from 1922. Even though it's all the same movie, the only difference is that 1922 movie was a silent film, but this one I can understand the movie a little better. Despite this came out the same year as the year 1979, the same year as Frank Langella's Dracula, which I'm going to be getting to in a few shows. The cinematography looks pretty good throughout. The next day comes, and Jonathan wants to pay for a horse, but doesn't get one as he walks to Transylvania. And I'm like, what the hell happened to his horse? And that was a minor nitpick for me while he goes under the waterfall on the river and eventually gets to Transylvania in the castle of Count Dracula. And the shots are tremendous, and this movie, in my opinion, as director Werner Herzog does a good job at shooting the movie like a horror flick. And the score was good as it felt adventurous, and Jonathan meets Count Dracula in his castle. And I like this version of Dracula, as Max Schreck's version was creepy as hell, but this one's just as creepy in my opinion, and kudos to the makeup artist for making it just as good as before. Jonathan accidentally cuts his hand as Count Dracula tried to drink the blood, but Jonathan resists. And can Jonathan guess he's a vampire at this point? He might do that later in the film, as Jonathan falls asleep, and Lucy wakes up from a nightmare and finds a bat in her bedroom. And we get to the next day with Jonathan waking up thinking, what the hell happened the night before? And he tastes the food and looks for Count Dracula, as the only thing he could find in him is in a dark place. And other than Count Dracula, this movie isn't too scary, as it's PG rated, and it was back in the day when PG-13 didn't exist yet. Jonathan writes a note to Lucy about how strange the castle is, and later in the day, Count Dracula approaches Jonathan, having a conversation as Jonathan brings up Lucy in a photograph, while the wolf howling was a bit distracting to listen to. The dialogue while they do that. And at the same time, we move on to the next scene, where Jonathan continues looking at the book of the vampires, and he falls asleep until Count Dracula approaches the room and wakes Jonathan up while Lucy sleepwalks, believing she sees Count Dracula sucking the blood out of Jonathan, as she tells Dr. Abraham Van Helsing, played by Walter Landegast. Now, I like how frightening Count Dracula is compared to Count Orlok last time, as they're just as scary as before in 1922, like I brought up. Jonathan spies on Count Dracula as he takes off in a carriage and learns she's coming for Lucy and wants to leave the castle to catch up with Count Dracula. As some of these scenes were reminding me of Nosferatu from 1922, as this is supposed to be a remake of that movie, shot for shot, I'll say, with a few extra words in the title. And I did like the shots with three men canoeing in the lake, as well as when we get the man on a ship. Those two shots were great shots. The men open the coffin, and there's a crap ton of rats inside the coffin, and we get a moment where Renfield releases some bugs as he eats some flies, and he's been arrested and taken to jail while he's laughing like crazy, while Lucy is worried because Jonathan hasn't written her for weeks, and rightfully so, as Jonathan tries to make it back home. And I worry for Jonathan, like, did he turn into a vampire by the end of the movie? And I'm gonna spoil it at this point. He did. Lucy asks Renfield why he sent Jonathan to Transylvania, as he responds with laughter that sounded kind of annoying after a while, as he steals a newspaper from the guards without letting him know about it, and the ship arrives to civilization, and Renfield is happy his master made it to location where he's been held prisoner, as the captain has been tied up, and for some reason it might have been off screen that Count Dracula tied him up, while there are rats everywhere, and the government have a meeting saying to get home quietly, as well as making a cross on their building, while we get a shot of a crap ton of rats coming from ship to the town. And at this point, I'm tired of all the shots with rats, as that's another nitpick I have to give this movie. Count Dracula gets off the ship to make a way to get to Lucy as morning comes, and a carriage finds Jonathan and brings Jonathan back home. And Lucy at nighttime comes, and Count Dracula looks for the home of Jonathan and Lucy and goes in the bedroom and approaches Lucy and tells her he will not die. And she says everyone will die, even Jonathan. And the dialogue between Count Dracula and Lucy is sort of scary to watch, but not too frightening. Lucy reads a book of Nosferatu the Vampyre, while Jonathan laughs about it as he's either turned into one or how ridiculous it sounds. And Renfield is happy to see Count Dracula, and Count Dracula commands Renfield to do something else, while Lucy wants to speak to the mayor, as she knows they're carrying too many coffins versus all the evil coming to the town. And Dr. Van Helsing believes it's all in her imagination, as he believes she needs some rest, and she wants to get rid of the vampires in town. And how in the hell does Dr. Van Helsing believe in this crap? As there's a Count Dracula and Jonathan, as he turns into a vampire, while he says, "How did I make your acquaintance?" as Jonathan is a complete different person, while nighttime comes and Lucy looks for Count Dracula. And the plot is similar to Nosferatu from 1922, but spoken with dialogue, whereas in the 1922 movie, there was no dialogue whatsoever, which made that movie kind of boring compared to this movie. The next morning comes, and Lucy is encountered by dancing people who are celebrating what exactly, I don't get what's happening in here, as the crap load of rats are eating the human food, and a mate shows Lucy Jonathan is dead by the vampire bite. And Lucy wants to destroy Count Dracula as she puts on Jonathan's shoes and sees Count Dracula. He's in the same bedroom as Lucy, as she tries to make him bite her, in which he does. And we get the shot of a bat flying, as well as Count Dracula looking at the camera like in the 1922 movie, but not in the same way, as she lets Count Dracula continue drinking her blood till the next morning comes, as he loses track of time. And Count Dracula is still feeding while Lucy's eyes are open, and Count Dracula goes to the light and suddenly dies, and Lucy has the marking of the vampire bite, and she suddenly dies, and Dr. Van Helsing regrets not helping Lucy, as the doctor has no choice but to kill Lucy with a stick, and gets arrested and goes to jail. And the climax was messy, as the first half of this worked better than the second half, and we'll see if Robert Eggers can do a better version of this story than the 1922 version and Werner Herzog. But we'll see if I like this movie in a rating. Give me a sec. I'll give this movie a 6.6 out of 10. In my opinion, better than the 1922 film, as the movie is well done, as this is the acting, and this movie is well shot, well made, and I do like the characters, and despite this movie coming out in the year 1979, same year as the Frank Langella Dracula, as I'll talk about it when I get there, the cinematography looks pretty good throughout. The shots in this movie were tremendous in here, as director Werner Herzog does a good job at shooting this movie like a horror flick, and the score was good as it felt adventurous, as Klaus Kinski's version of the vampire was just as scary as Max Schreck's version, so kudos to the makeup artist for making it just as good as the 1922 vampire. The movie isn't too scary, as it's PG rated back in the day when PG-13 didn't exist quite yet. And despite there were nitpicks I called out throughout the show, but at the end of the day, it was a good film, so it's a recommendation to see the first half of this more than the second half, as that section had some problems, but it's not as scary as I hoped for. So I'll leave the scary parts to when I see the Robert Eggers film, as it looked horrifying based on what I've seen in the trailers. So I would like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with the 1930s Dracula. And until then, I am Dracula.